Welcome to another installment of Inside the Tape, brought to you by Inside the Birds, where myself and Greg Cosell talk about everything we saw on film from the previous Philadelphia Eagles game, and then we preview the next week opponent, who is, in this case, the LA Rams. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Jump into the reason everybody's here, and that's to hear about the Eagles. So, Greg, give me, first things first, give me a broad overview of what you saw from the tape and what stood out to you when you, as soon as you turned on that tape like you do in the office there with the pointer, the clicker. What's the first thing you
got it right here. Got the remote right here.
Yeah. So what'd you notice after watching that tape?
You know, I think Eagles fans, Clay, probably wonder why the Commanders put up so many points. I think that was probably the biggest surprise to most Eagles fans. Wouldn't you think?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
So what normally happens is when something like that occurs, as you know, it's because what you expect is going to happen based on your evaluation of talent doesn't happen. And where I wanted to start with that was we expected, I did, I'm sure you did, most people probably did, that the Eagles' defensive line would dominate a Commanders' offensive line that, quite frankly, had not been very good in pass protection. And that did not occur in the game. And sometimes, as you well know from having played for many years, sometimes those things don't happen. The other team, they're still professional football players. And I'm not trying to be cliched, but that's the truth. They're still NFL players. And the Commanders' O-line actually held up extremely well in pass protection, and Sam Howell was not under duress in this game. He was able to sit back there, deliver the football, and we know, quite frankly, that the Eagles were playing with a secondary that is not the secondary they want to be playing with. They had Bradbury in the slot. I'm not sure that's something he does real well. They had Job on the outside, and I think Job, for the most part, has done okay, but he's not the guy they want on the outside. They had to play Edmonds at safety. We know he's not the guy they want starting at safety because he didn't start the year there. Yeah. So, you know, Howell was comfortable in the pocket working against a makeshift secondary, and I think the game reflected that. And certainly third down reflected that. Howell was outstanding on third down throwing the football. So when I was done watching the tape, both sides of the ball, and just sat back and thought about the game, that's what really struck me.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. You know, from a player's perspective, I agree with all those things you said. And from a player's perspective, to me, it's just one of those games. You're playing, you're the Eagles, you're the better team, you have the better players, you have the better coaches, in my opinion. But against the Washington Commanders, the Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants, one of those division games, sometimes you can throw all that out the window. It's crazy, but just sometimes you play these teams so often. You're so familiar with the players that they got. They're so familiar with you. It's a rivalry game. Sometimes you just throw that out the window, and that's basically what I got from watching the tape. You know, looking back at the Commanders tape, we saw the Cardinals, we saw the Broncos, two bad teams. You know, they were 2-1, but they beat two bad teams. They came up against a team that I think the Eagles were on the level with the Buffalo Bills. And the Bills just trounced them 37-3. Howell looked bad. The defense looked bad. The offense looked bad. So I was expecting, you know, something similar to that, because what the Bills did to them, okay, they beat two really bad teams, the Broncos. You know, the Broncos just gave up 80 points the week after, you know, the Commanders beat them. So how bad is this Broncos team that the Commanders beat? Then you see what happens with Buffalo. But like you said, I think the defense has a lot of issues in the defensive backfield. I think they got to get better at bunch set, switch releases. You know, Bradbury, like you said, isn't that comfortable in the slot from what I see. He doesn't want to play there. He's doing it because he's a real professional.
Yeah.
Job got picked on a little bit. He's not 100%, you know, comfortable out there. He's a young guy, but, you know, like you said, he did an okay job. Decent. Edmonds, not great either. The defensive backfield just wasn't great. Josh Jobe has given up 100+ rating and 2 touchdowns this season. You're giving up over 100 rating. You're not doing great. But then Darius Slay has given up 103 rating this
I
season.
know I'm glad you mentioned that, because I actually thought on that final touchdown drive by the Commanders to tie it up, I thought Slay did not play well on that drive. And I think overall he did not have one of his better games. And you know what? It's a 17-game schedule now, but you played when it was 16 games. Even great players, they don't play great every single game.
Yeah.
It's just not humanly possible.
No, it's not. It's definitely not possible, but the D line typically makes up for it. But hats off to the Commanders.
Yeah.
The Eagles did get some pressure, but it wasn't game-changing amount of pressure. They were still able to put up points. But, I thought that was something that they did well. And then offensively, I think the Eagles, as a broad stroke, the run game wasn't as successful, but they picked it up in the pass game. And that was good to see. A couple of pressures on Hurts, but nothing crazy. He was holding the ball for a decent amount of time when he got sacked there. So, overall, I was impressed with the offense. They did play well. It was good to see Hurts in the passing game, but also the running game took a step back. So
I would say, you mentioned Hurts, and that was the other thing that I thought after I finished watching the tape is I thought Hurts overall in this game, Clay, was much more decisive with his reads and his throws. And as we saw last season, he made some outstanding vertical throws. He will always, because of the kind of quarterback he is and always has been, because he's always been one of the better athletes on the field, maybe the best athlete on the field as he was growing up playing the position. He will always have plays in which he leaves the pocket prematurely. That's probably just who he is, and you just live with that because that's the way he plays. But they clearly found something in this game when they lined up in 11 personnel. They found out because Emmanuel Forbes, the rookie, was the boundary corner, so they knew where he would be. And just so people understand, the boundary corner means he lines up to the short side of the field. So they knew where he would be. They put A.J. Brown on him and had A.J. Brown work on him. And they got, and Brown had some big plays against him because they got the matchup they wanted. A veteran quality receiver who knows how to attack a corner versus a rookie corner who hasn't seen that kind of stuff. Even though he played in the SEC, it's still not the NFL. So they found something in that game and they stayed with it and they hit some big plays.
Absolutely. And that was funny. I was just going to ask you about, we'll start off with Jalen Hurts, but same thing. I thought Hurts played well. I thought, he obviously he got the ball around to his receivers. I still want to see him target Goddard more. I thought Goddard was open a couple times. And it seems to me on plays where he can pick, there's a couple of plays he could pick A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert. I see him both open. He goes with A.J., which is understandable. I mean, A.J.'s his friend. A.J.'s dependable.
Right.
So I think maybe he's got to start hitting Goddard on a few of those because I thought maybe Goddard had a couple of loafs. Or I don't know if that has to do with him not getting the ball or whatnot. But overall, like you said, I thought Jalen played well. I thought on that penalty to Swift, they called it was a ticky-tack penalty. I think it was legal contact. But if that sluggo that Swift had on the linebacker of the Commanders, man, if he hits that, I know I'm being nitpicky right now, but if he hits that play, Swift might still be running. I mean, Swift had a heck of a job there.
And it's funny you mentioned Swift. Obviously, he didn't get as many carries as the previous 2 games, but I thought he continued to run really well. I mean, he only had 14 carries, I believe, for 56 yards, but it was just the way the game played out. And but I think my sense is that the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, is committed to running the ball. I don't think this is going to be one of those teams where they just throw. I think the game played out where they felt they had some good matchups, and they went after them. They took advantage of them, and therefore, Hurts had more dropbacks in this game. But as I said, I thought Hurts was more decisive. I thought he looked better, played better, and that's the way the game played. Look, it was a close game. They probably got the sense that they had to keep scoring points. Don't forget they were losing in this game. This was not a game where they were ahead, as in their previous games, where they could kind of be physical with their O-line and run the football. They were losing in this game, and they needed to score.
Yeah, and I like to see that, man. As a player, there's just a different feel, and you need some of those games. You
Yeah.
can't you can practice, you could play, you blow a team. It's a different feeling when you're in a tight game, when you're playing from behind. You need those. You're not going to go through the season without those. So people say, I'm worried about the Eagles. I think this was a good thing. It put them in that situation to where they had to play from behind. They're in a close game. They go to overtime. They're making some high leverage plays throughout the game. And to piggyback off your point, talking about the run game with Swift, I thought he's not leaving meat on the bone. When I'm watching a Swift run, I'm saying, hey, he got what he could out of that. And as a tight end, that's what I want. I want when I'm watching film, I'm seeing my running back is doing what he can to get every yard. That makes me okay. I'm comfortable blocking for this guy. I want to block for this guy. I know he's going to do what he needs to. And then in the pass game, he looked good. Like I said, we that penalty doesn't count towards his yards, but he was wide open on that sluggo. He had that big play at the end of the game, one of the biggest plays of the game. I mean, that was in overtime where he turned the corner and got about 10, 11 yards, but it looked like he could have got about 2 or 3.
Right.
So Swift still made some big plays. So what do you think of the O-line's performance in this game, Greg? What'd you see on film there?
Yeah, I thought, overall it was really solid because I think ultimately, and obviously they lost Jurgens, who didn't come out for the second half with the foot injury, but I thought Opeta played well. I mean, you know how it is with offensive linemen. I don't want to give people the impression that I'm charting Opeta on every play. I'm not. But, the fact that I didn't really notice him, tells me that he played pretty well. And I think that when you play the Commanders, you look at that D line, that can be great. I don't think they've been great this year. One could argue they haven't been great in a couple of years since a few years ago when they were really, really dominant, but they're still really good individual players. And I don't think they were the dominant force in the game at all. So, ultimately you'd have to say the Eagles O-line did a really good job. I think Hurts had 37 pass attempts, but probably 40 or so dropbacks. And I don't think that their pass rush was a big factor in this game.
No, absolutely not. No, Opeta in 25 snaps after Cam Jurgens left with that foot injury, in 25 snaps, Opeta didn't allow a single pressure. Like you said, didn't really notice him. He didn't do nothing crazy standoutish, but he's not giving up pressure. And that's what you need. You need to give Jalen Hurts that time. And the Eagles were the 5th highest rated pass blocking efficiency in the league, and they only allowed 6 pressures on 43 dropbacks, which is a pretty good clip, a really good clip. And then Lane Johnson had the highest pass blocking grade among offensive tackles. He's still doing well.
He's so good. And the interesting thing, Clay, is the Commanders almost played 2 different halves in terms of their defense because they hardly played any man coverage in the first half, and in the second half they came out and they played much more man. They also picked up their blitz frequency with far more 5-man pressures. So it was almost 2 different kinds of defensive football halves that the Eagles had to play against, and they were fine. There was no problem with it. So, I think, again, their offense, don't forget, they did score 34 points. Their offense was good. Their pass game was good. They made big plays in the pass game. And we know how the Eagle organization, and certainly Nick Sirianni, thinks is you need explosives in the pass game. That's NFL football these days. You need explosives in the pass game. There are going to be probably a lot more games like this. I'm not saying the opponent's always going to score 30 against them, but there's going to be more games where they're going to have to throw the ball and create explosives in the pass game than the kinds of game they played against the Bucs, for instance.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You're going to see those games. And, I think we'll talk later, but I think, this Rams team is an underrated team. People
for
think
sure.
that, they're very underrated. But let's get to, if there was a problem on this Eagles team, right now people would say, what is going on with the defensive backfield? So watching the tape, you're giving up all these points to Sam Howell, who's not a great quarterback. Robinson's a decent running back. He's not a great. He does got some decent receivers out there. McLaurin can play. You got some guys that can play, but I think they kind of got the better of the Eagles defensive back. So what was the tape showing you when you're watching this game? What were you seeing between that matchup between the Eagles defensive backs and the Commanders wide receivers / tight end?
Yeah, they've got very good receivers. Their trio of wideouts for the Commanders is really solid. McLaurin is really, really good. He's a really good route runner. He can line up anywhere in your formation. He's not just in one spot. And then, of course, you've got Dotson, a second-year player from Penn State, who I think is going to be a really good player. You've
Big
got
touchdown catch at the end of the game, man. Huge.
They've got Samuel, who kind of is a jack of all trades kind of player, can line up anywhere. So that's a tough group to play against. And, like you said, this is not a secondary that's comfortable right now. What they do is they line up Slay at left corner. Now, Slay played right corner on the final 2 plays of the game. They moved him to match up to McLaurin, but he did not match up to McLaurin all game long. They had Slay at left corner. They had Bradbury when it was base defense at right corner, and when it was sub defense, Bradbury came inside, and Joe played right corner. Until the end of the game, because obviously the tying touchdown throw came against Job because he was at that point at left corner since they had moved Slay to right corner. But, we know that they feel that they need to be better in the secondary because they signed Bradley Roby. So you don't make a signing like that as an organization unless you feel that there's a weakness that you want to address.
And while we're on the subject, you've had some experience with watching Bradley Roby on tape. So, Greg, give us your insider info here from watching the guy on tape. I'm not that familiar with him, but give us what you've seen in the past from Roby. Who are the Eagles getting?
Yeah, well, I remember, Clay, I go back to when he came out of Ohio State as a first-round pick. He was a big-time corner talent on the outside.
What year was he in? What draft class?
I don't know. Is he maybe a 9 or 10-year pro by now? It's been a while.
Yeah, he's up there.
Yeah, but he's twitchy, sudden. He had outstanding outside corner traits, and he's played well in this league for quite a while. Now, the last couple of years in New Orleans, he predominantly, not 100%, but he predominantly played in the slot. And that's probably one reason the Eagles were anxious to bring him in and sign him, because he has a ton of slot experience. And again, I don't know what kind of shape he's in. I don't know where he stands, but let's assume for the moment he's ready to go, and he could play this week and be their slot corner. And this way they keep Bradbury outside. But he's a good blitzer. See, in New Orleans, because Dennis Allen is a big blitzer, as you probably know, some really good blitz concepts. Roby was used as a blitzer at times. He's a good man coverage player. He's a good zone coverage player. He's just a solid corner at this point in his career. But he was an original first-round pick because he had high-level corner traits. So assuming he's ready to play, I think you're going to see him out there very soon.
Man, that's a heck of a scouting report right there. It's like you've done this before.
Once or twice. Once or twice. Yeah.
That's good to hear. And I know that Sidney Brown coming back, they played him in there a little bit. He's a guy that's more versatile than Edmonds. And I think we saw a little bit of why Edmonds maybe wasn't. People when he signs a free agent kind of pencil him in as, hey, this guy will be our second safety there. He'll be a starter. And you saw a little bit why this guy maybe wasn't the guy that was starting. He's limited in a lot of ways. He could drop an easy interception, that tip ball in the end zone.
Yeah,
I thought he should have had that one as well. But I'm with you, Greg. I think that I think this signing will help out a lot because Bradbury's good at covering, but I think it's just different. Those switch releases, those bunch releases, those confuse defenses, motions, things like that. When you have guys that don't play the slot, it's not instinctive when they pass off a guy and let the outside corner take the other guy. They're not used to doing that. Usually it's easy. Whoever ends up outside, I'm going to take the outside guy. Inside, you kind of got to make these decisions because it's a switch release. Okay, which guy do I take? I don't know. It's a different feel. It's a different vibe. You can be a great cover guy, but sometimes you're just going to cover the wrong receiver, and it doesn't matter. So I think bringing in an experienced slot is a great move by Howie. I mean, obviously, we can trust in Howie. We trust. He's been doing a great job, but I think we're both on the same page there when we're talking about the defensive backfield. Let's talk a little bit about these linebackers. Nick Morrow, 3 sacks, 3 TFLs. I mean, needs Zach Cunningham playing another solid game. What's going on with these linebackers, Greg? What are you seeing?
Cunningham every week shows up really well, Clay, in the run game. He is a really, really good run defender. I mean, that's what he is. That's what he's best at. He's never been a great coverage player, but he's a really, really good run defender, and he's always a factor in the run game. Morrow, look, sacks. Obviously, he's a linebacker. He's not going to get 3 sacks every week, but the Eagles were aggressive, at times throughout the game, and Morrow was featured as a blitzer. They lined up in that double mug look, and so people understand what that means. It's two players in each A gap. And in the Eagles' case, it was Morrow and Cunningham. He got 1 sack where they ran a nice little stunt. I believe Morrow might have been the penetrator and Cunningham the looper. And Morrow ended up getting the sack. So yeah, and he got a sack when he ran down Howell. So it was just one of those games. You're not going to see that all the time, but I think both those players played very, very good games.
No, I agree. It was really impressive. And man, the difference. I watched Nick Morrow, covering a lot of the Bears stuff
That's
out
right.
here last year. And man, the difference having the Eagles defensive line in front of you makes. I mean, that obviously helps these linebackers. Have me wanting to come out and play linebacker, Greg. Behind these defensive tackles, you got Fletch playing like that, Jalen Carter playing like these guys. Like, I want to play defense. No blockers touching these linebackers. But I think that's a good segue into that.
And this was the first game. He'd been really, really good in the first 3 games. This was the first game where Jordan Davis did not play particularly well. But again, he's not going to play great in 17 games. But this was the first game after 3 really strong games where he was really not a factor. And in fact, he got moved too easily in this game.
Yeah. And what else did you see on that defensive line there that that stood out to you on the tape?
Yeah, I mean, I think finally later in the fourth quarter, that's when we started to see Hassan Reddick later in the fourth quarter, and hopefully that continues, Clay, going forward.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought watching the tape. I thought finally in the fourth quarter he started to get cranked up a bit, and we saw the pass rush that we saw a year ago pretty much on a weekly basis. So now the cat is off his hand. Look, this. Any position you play in the league where you have contact with another person, which is anything along the line, it's hard to play with one hand. Yeah, I mean, you just can't do that. So, and as a pass rusher, you need to use your hands. So hopefully now that the cast is off, he'll get back to being what he was. But he started to get it cranked up later in the fourth quarter.
No, I agree, man. I was good to see because he wasn't the Hassan Reddick that we have come to know and love. And I mean, he was just getting blocked almost easily. But like you said, he got cranked up a little bit there. And I've had the dislocated fingers before, but never a thumb. I know how hard it is to block and get your hands inside when you have a dislocated finger as a player, and every single play is just going to hurt, and you don't got the range of motion. You can't squeeze. It makes it difficult. And defensive linemen, defensive ends especially, use their hands a lot. But I thought we did a good job here of covering the previous game against the Commanders. And the main thing is the Eagles got to 4-0, and they did a good job there.
That's
but
what counts,
forward,
Clay. You know that. You played.
We got the W.
You get the W. I mean, then coaches coach the mistakes. That's their job, and you work on things. You're always working. No individual or team ever plays a perfect game, no matter what the final score is. Now coaches coach, but you know what? You're 4-0.
Yeah, 4-0 and a chance to go 5-0, but they have a long flight coming off an overtime win, dramatic fashion against a division rival. Could this be a trap game? I don't know. So let's start off with the opponent this week. We got the LA Rams playing against Matt Stafford, a guy I used to play with on the Detroit Lions back in the day. We made the playoffs back in 2016 together.
Ah, you were on that team, huh?
Yeah, I was on that team. Lost first round to the Seattle Seahawks. Tough place to play in Seattle, but we gave them hell there for a little bit, and they ended up pulling it out on us. But what are you seeing in Stafford in this offense, Greg?
You actually a moment ago had what was potentially a great segue, as we say in the business, Mr. Harbor. When you talked about the Rams and you were talking about motion, stacks, bunches. They do a ton of reduced splits. And that's another reason the signing of Roby, and the hope is that he plays because he's seen all that. Someone like Sidney Brown, if he's back this week, if he were to play in the slot, he hasn't seen that.
Yeah.
Job hasn't seen a ton of that if he keeps playing. They are using more motion. Motion's becoming very prevalent in the league. And they use it for many reasons. One main reason is to get receivers free access off the ball. And they have a small receiver in Tutu Atwell, who's probably 155 pounds soaking wet, and he has great speed. And you want to get him free access off the ball so he can scream into his routes. But they are really good with reduced splits, which make it difficult to press, and it almost forces corners to play with width and depth, as you know. So they're very good with stacks, with bunches. Now you have communication. Someone like Roby understands all that. He's done it for a lot of years in the league. But they're a fun offense to watch. And I got to tell you, as someone who's studied quarterbacks for a long, long time and really loved breaking them down, Matthew Stafford's always been one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch. This guy throws the football really, really well. He's a high-level thrower. He's tough. He's physical. He stands there and throws it. He's a better athlete than people think. Even at this point in his career, he's not a statue. But he will stand and deliver, and he can throw it to any part of the field and is an aggressive thrower. And he's made some throws this year with such anticipation. I stopped my Cowboy remote when he's starting his delivery, and because I know the route concept, so I know where he's throwing it. But if I were to show someone who doesn't know this stuff, if I stopped it and said, "Hey, Stafford just started his delivery, who's he throwing the ball to?" Someone who didn't know would say, "I have no idea who he's throwing the ball to," because his anticipation sometimes is just off the charts.
That's what makes me nervous a little bit, because you saw what Sam Howell was able to do to this Eagles defensive backfield. And I know Staff, and I know he's watching that tape and he's licking his chops. He's a guy that brings the offense in early on Wednesdays before, bring in bagels or whatever. And you'll sit there and you'll be like, hey, we'll look at a little bit of our tape that he likes, and you'll watch a little bit of the opponents, and we can move the ball on these guys. And he talks about his thoughts for the week. Hardworking dude, in early, out late. Hard practice guy. The players love to play for him. He's just a dude that is going to give it your all. And people look at this team he's with, especially with Cooper Kupp out, maybe back, probably not, but there's a chance that he plays with that hamstring injury. You don't want that with our slot issues. So with Stafford, this makes it tough for the Eagles defensive backfield, because he's a veteran. He knows how to exploit all those motions, those bunches, those things that we're seeing, Greg. Yeah. Staff is a tape wizard. He will see that, and he will know exactly what to do to affect the defenses. So I agree with you. Stafford has been looking great.
They've had some really cool plays too with the use of motion. I don't know if you saw this week, Nakua, who of course leads the NFL, 39 catches, 50 targets, playing the Z position almost always, not 100%, but almost always lines up on the same side as Higbee, the tight end, who's the Y. So he's the Z, but he's in motion, because he's off and off the ball. He had a cool play this week where he motioned and actually released inside the tight. This is when he wasn't with the tight end, but he motioned inside the tight end.
On that deep over route? Was that?
Yeah. And all it ended up being, they are so good, Clay, and you know this, they are so good with high-low concepts, and they get to them in so many different ways. But when all's said and done, they're just high-low concepts, but it's how they get to them. And McVay is a master at that.
Oh, absolutely. And Tyler Higbee, you mentioned him. He's a tight end that could play, and the Eagles are giving up a 142.6 rating and 3 touchdowns to opposing tight ends. So that's also something that makes me nervous. Higbee had a few plays up the seam last week watching that tape.
Good player.
And, yeah, he's a good player, and he can make some plays. And, Puka Nacua, I was down at Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl, and he's a guy that popped. Obviously, did I think he was going to be a guy that broke the record in 4 games, the rookie? No, but he's a guy that can catch the football, and in zone coverage, he knows how to get open. I mean, he's been getting open in some man, but he's more of a zone type guy. He's not going to threaten you crazy down the field with speed. He's not super twitchy, but he is a guy that you have to account for.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. He sort of fits the profile of the old school possession receiver. He's not necessarily going to run by you, but he has a great feel for finding voids in zones, and they're very good with how they run routes to attack voids in zones. because every zone has voids. You know, if zones didn't, everybody would play the same zone. Every zone has voids, and it's just a matter of how you get into those voids. And Sean McVay, to me, is one of the best in the league at understanding where the voids are, how to get into them, and he's really good with route spacing. Nobody talks about that, but anytime there's confined space, and people don't think about a football field as confined space like they do, let's say, a hockey rink or a basketball court, but it's still there's still confined space. So anytime there's confined space, the spacing of routes is absolutely critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at we talked about the pass game a little bit here, and looking at the run game, Kyron Williams, Ronnie Rivers, the Eagles are averaging 2.9 yards per carries against this year, so nobody's been able to really run on them.
Yeah.
Anything there worry you for the Birds? You think they, any hedgeway there?
I don't think, quite honestly, Clay, that'll be a big factor. I mean, look, we know that Brian Robinson had his two best runs, in the fourth quarter, the 9-yarder followed by the 15-yard touchdown. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they'll never be a good run, but they're not going to sustain offense, just like the Commanders didn't sustain offense with the run game. I know Williams last week had 25 carries. That will not happen this week. He's not going to rush for 100 yards. He's not a great runner anyway. I did him coming out of Notre Dame. He's a solid back, really good receiver, physical kid, tough. Rivers is a nice compliment. He's kind of stocky build, but is it possible to break off a long run? Yeah, those things can happen against great defenses. So, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, they're only going to rush for 20 yards. Sure, could Williams break off a 30-yarder? Yeah, that happens.
Yeah.
But they're not going to sustain offense with the run game.
No, absolutely. And looking at this defense a little bit, obviously, I mean, we all know the first thing that stands out is Aaron Donald. For the Rams defense, and their defensive line, I think they're second, third, they're in the top quartile in the league of sacks. So they can get after an opposing quarterback.
Yes.
They got a lot of different players that have gotten, more than 2 sacks. So looking at Aaron Donald, and obviously, you look at the outside linebackers that they like to rush a little bit there. Is there anybody that you see besides Aaron Donald that could pose a problem for the Eagles offensive line?
They're kind of a fun defense to watch. There's a lot of no names, okay?
Yeah.
But they drafted a kid from Tennessee named Byron Young,
Yep.
who plays on the edge. He's going to be a good player. He's bendy. He's athletic. He's flexible. He's learning how to rush in the NFL, but he has pass rush traits, Clay.
Yeah.
And then they've got this kid, Michael Heck, who's, not necessarily a great pass rusher, but he's just a solid player. But they're kind of a fun defense to watch with all these guys. And I think the important thing is, from a coverage standpoint, Raheem Morris is the defensive coordinator, and I think he does a great job. And there's a lot of Vic Fangio in what he does, meaning that they give you a lot of quarters looks pre-snap, and as you know, from that look, you can go anywhere. And they do go anywhere. Now, the middle of the field can sometimes be a little fuzzy with how they play. So one thing I think you might see the Eagles do is work outside the numbers, because the two corners are Witherspoon and Kendrick. And, they're NFL corners. But I would think that the Eagles with Smith and Brown would feel like for sure that they can attack outside the numbers with those two guys against Kendrick and Witherspoon.
No, I agree. And it's like you said, man, Byron Young, another guy at Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Looking at that guy, this guy can play. Had a good combine.
Bendy. He's bendy.
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
one of those guys I used to hate to block. I used to hate those guys like I'd like the big, strong dudes that just would, try to maul you and just beat you. So I'm like, bro, you're not just going to run over me. So he's a tough block there. And then obviously Aaron Donald. I mean, depending if Juergens is back, I trust Kelsey, and I think, our offensive tackles. But if there was a position, Opeta is the only guy that you would think could be a weak spot. Obviously, he played well last week, but that is an area of concern because we all know Aaron Donald can take over a game.
And one thing they like to do, Clay, they line up a lot in what we call loaded fronts, where they have 3 defensive linemen to one side of the center. And what they normally do with Donald is they put him where they believe he has the best matchup. So, for instance, this past week, against the Colts started a rookie left tackle who I watched coming out of BYU, and I didn't think he was really a strong prospect, but he had to start for the Colts this week. So what they did this week was they put Donald opposite the load at the wide 9 so he could work against Blake Freeland, the left tackle. This week, you might see Donald in the middle of the 3-man load so he can get a running start and work against Sua Opeta. You know, they try to find who they believe Donald can work best against. And, you know, that those loaded fronts can be very, very difficult because all kinds of stunt concepts come from those loaded fronts, and you really have to be on your game mentally.
No, absolutely. I think those are tough, but luckily for the Eagles, they have a veteran offensive line, and I think that was good stuff, Greg. I think we gave a good look at the Rams. We gave a good recap of the Eagles. So final thoughts. We do this every week. Do you think the Eagles come away with a victory here, and why?
You know, they're the better team. I think most people would say that, but this game, you know, and I have to pick games when I do the pregame show and Inside the Birds, and that's my least favorite thing to do, Clay, because sitting and watching tape, I feel like I could give you 5 reasons on either side, you know, and so it's tough. I'm not a good, you know, prognosticator, but you know, you would look at this game and think, okay, the Eagles are better, and they're better in a way that they could win 31-10 because they're better. But there's something about this game that just makes me a little nervous. You know, if Stafford has a big game, and there's no question he could also throw 3 picks, because the reality is the Rams O-line is also not a great O-line.
Young guys, you don't know, like some Steve Avila, you had rookies in there.
Yeah, so I mean, that could happen, and Stafford could throw 3 picks, and the Eagles could walk away with a lopsided win. But if by chance they struggle a bit with their pass rush, as they did this past week, and Stafford's comfortable, I could also see Stafford throwing for 350 and 3 touchdowns. You know, I mean, you know him personally. You played with him. The guy can. You know, the guy's really, really good. He'll be in the Hall of Fame discussion when he retires. So there's something about this game that makes me nervous. But you know, like I said, the Eagles could win big, but I'm just a little nervous about this one.
I'm nervous too. I think it's a tough one. You're obviously traveling. I didn't really like those 2-day West Coast road trips. I didn't hear if the Eagles are going early or not, but typically you're going to the West and you're not playing a night game. You know, I think it's a 4:00 game they have there. So you're probably going to go there a couple days early. It's a little bit of, you know, obviously these teams been to the Super Bowl. They know how to handle all that noise. You got Jalen Hurts as your quarterback, who's a no-nonsense guy, which also helps those trips. But there's something about those trips. As a player, I know some crazy things can happen. I'm taking the Eagles to win, but I think it's going to be one of those games just like the one we saw last Sunday. It's going to come down to the wire, back and forth type of game. But I am taking the Birds. But good stuff today, Greg. I think we covered a lot here.
We did, yeah.
Got a lot of good info out there. It was a fun time. And we will say goodbye on behalf of myself, Greg Cosell, and Inside the Tape, on a part of the Inside the Birds network. We will catch you guys next Wednesday to talk about the Rams game and to discuss the Eagles' next opponent. Have a good one. Fly, Eagles, fly.